The outboard that feels perfect can cost you the most, the earliest, not because it fails, but because it keeps running while the ownership math quietly shifts. It stays smooth and confident, so you trust it longer than you should. In this video, we are going to unpack why that happens years before anything truly fails, what the early signals actually look like, and how to protect yourself without spiraling into paranoia. The honeymoon that teaches you to ignore risk. It starts with comfort. Everything feels settled, dependable, almost boring in the best way. The engine fires quickly, idles smooth, and pushes the hull like it was built for it. The sound is refined enough that you stop listening for trouble. And that is the first quiet shift. You stop scanning for warnings because you have not needed to. That feeling is not an accident. Manufacturers sell confidence-long life, clean operation, strong mid-range pull, fewer surprises. Often, the promise is real in the early years. The catch is that modern outboards are also designed to compensate. They adjust fueling, manage timing, protect themselves, and smooth over issues that older engines would have revealed through rough running or smoke. Great engineering can delay the moment an owner says something is wrong. Early signs rarely arrive like drama. They show up as moments too small to accuse the engine. A slightly longer crank on a cool morning that never repeats. An idle dip that recovers so fast you question whether it happened. A beep that appears once, then disappears right as you start paying attention. That is how perfect engines teach owners to rationalize. Rationalizing is easy because boating is messy. Fuel quality varies. Batteries age, loads change, wind and current change how performance feels. So the owner becomes a storyteller. The prop must be dirty. The fuel must be old. The day must be weird. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes it becomes a habit that protects the engine from suspicion. There is also pride. When you spend real money on something that runs beautifully, you attach your identity to it. You become the person who picked the good motor. Admitting uncertainty feels like admitting you misjudged. So doubts get pushed down. Trips continue. The engine keeps winning trust. Meanwhile, support shifts in the background. Catalogs update. Suppliers change. New models pull attention. Technicians specialize in what they see most. Nobody has to abandon older engines for reality to reorganize around whatever is newest. Then, the first real inconvenience appears, often disguised as a non-engine problem. Trim acting strange, charging acting inconsistent, a sensor complaint that comes and goes, a performance quirk that shows up only in a narrow range. The motor still runs, but confidence changes. You stay closer to the ramp, you pack extra gear, you avoid unnecessary risk. That is the beginning of the pre-failure cost. The engine keeps running, but it starts steering your decisions. Up to now, uncertainty stayed abstract. Next comes the first quote, where a small symptom meets real numbers, real delays, real choices. The parts cliff that turns small issues into big decisions. The first call feels simple. You want a quote, a component, a timeline. You expect a quick answer. Instead, there is hesitation, searching, questions you did not think mattered. Exact year, exact serial range, exact subsystem version. That is the moment you realize you do not own one engine. You own a specific variation. And that variation decides how painful the next step will be. A parts cliff is rarely out of stock forever. More often, it is the slow discovery that the simple path is gone. The part exists only as a larger assembly. The assembly has a revised version that needs another piece. That piece is backordered. The weight is uncertain. The price feels disconnected from the symptom. Suddenly, you are not planning a repair, you are managing risk. Modern outboards rely on networks of components that must match. Injectors can be treated like sets. Sensors can be tied to harness changes between production runs. Electronic modules can look identical while being different revisions. Lower unit parts can be quietly redesigned after a production range, leaving older versions less supported. Owners often learn this through something that feels too small to change their life. A trim component bundled into a pricey assembly, a connector not sold separately, a sensor replaced by a newer version that is not a clean drop-in. The manufacturer promised longevity. The problem is that longevity depends on continuity, and continuity is not guaranteed across every version of every subsystem. This is also where dealer reality appears. Shops prioritize what they see most. Technicians get fast on common platforms. Inventory follows demand. If your engine family is less common locally, Parts are less likely to be on shelves, and diagnosis takes longer. So you wait, and you keep boating because the engine still runs. You choose calmer days, shorter routes, easier plans. The trap is that running makes delay feel reasonable, even while delay can make the eventual fix more expensive. Some owners never hit the cliff. Others hit it once and start seeing their perfect motor differently, because they learn the hidden truth. Ownership risk can rise years before mechanical failure. After the parts hunt, a bigger barrier appears. Diagnosis requires branded tools, subscriptions, permissions. The problem stops being metal. It becomes access, the service gate, and the invisible locks. The conversation changes the first time you hear the phrase, "We can't fully confirm it without the factory tool." Not a generic scan tool, not a basic test routine, something tied to subscriptions, authorization, and manufacturer-specific access. At first it sounds normal, because modern engines are complex. Then it hits you. The tool is not only a tool, it is a gate. A modern outboard can run beautifully while still holding a story in its memory that you cannot see. The engine control unit logs events, watches sensor behavior, and decides when to protect itself. The problem is that modern issues do not always behave like old failures. They do not march downhill in a straight line. They show up in short episodes, then vanish right when you try to prove them. One day it feels perfect. Another day it feels slightly off. By the time you get it to someone, it behaves again. That creates a new kind of frustration. Intermittent problems are hard to diagnose with confidence. You cannot always reproduce them on command. You cannot always trigger them in a shop environment. And if you cannot reproduce them, the people trying to help you are forced to guess or tell you to come back when it gets worse. Owners hate that answer, but it is often honest. The manufacturer promised smarter protection and fewer catastrophic failures. That is often true. Modern protective logic can prevent damage older engines might have suffered. The trade-off is psychological. The engine can feel fine until it suddenly is not, because the computer makes decisions before the owner sees obvious symptoms. You may never hear a scary noise. You may just feel a power limit, a mode change, or a strange hesitation that comes and goes. This is where dependence creeps in. Even a trusted independent mechanic may be limited by what they can access, reset, and verify. Plenty of shops can do the mechanical fundamentals, compression, fuel testing, electrical troubleshooting. The wall appears when the engine needs a manufacturer-level handshake to clear a fault, confirm a data pattern, or pair a module correctly. At that point, you get pulled back toward the dealer network, whether you want to or not. And dealer networks are not built for speed during peak season. Shops get overloaded, techs get stretched, appointments can be weeks out. Even a good dealer may only have time for a quick look, not the deep, time-consuming chase required for a problem that appears once every few trips. It is not a villain story, it is capacity. Still, for the owner, it feels like a trap. Worried enough to want answers, not broken enough to demand priority. This is also where rumors creep in. People search online, find quick fixes, try resets, swap sensors, change settings. Some ideas help, some ideas are guesses. Some ideas make diagnosis harder by wiping the clues the engine stored. So the engine keeps running. Still looks clean, still sounds healthy, while the owner feels like they are negotiating with a system, not simply maintaining a machine. On big horsepower rigs, that uncertainty hits harder because a surprise power limit changes how you plan trips, weather windows, and distance. The computer story is only half the picture. Next comes the physical reality inside refined systems, where small cooling or fueling drift can snowball under load. If this is already changing how you judge reliability, hit like and subscribe for the rest of the breakdown. And quick question, would you rather pay early for certainty or keep running it until the symptom repeats? Tell me in the comments. The quiet heat and the problems that do not announce themselves. Some of the most expensive problems do not arrive like disasters. They arrive like small inconsistencies that can be blamed on almost anything. A motor feels slightly weaker in a certain range. A motor seems to idle differently after a long run. A motor behaves one way on a cool morning and another way on a hot afternoon. These are the kinds of observations that make owners sound vague, and vague complaints are hard to fix. The promise was efficiency and refinement. Modern designs deliver strong performance with cleaner emissions and smoother sound. But refinement often comes with tighter tolerances, leaner strategies, and systems that must stay in balance. Cooling, fueling, and sensor accuracy become a delicate relationship rather than a simple, it runs or it does not. Heat is not always a single moment of overheating. Sometimes it is a small restriction reducing water flow. Sometimes it is a thermostat aging slowly. Sometimes it is a water pump losing strength over time. Sometimes it is debris in a place that does not completely block flow, but changes it enough to matter under load. The challenge is that these problems can mimic other problems. A slight loss of speed can be prop slip, hull growth, fuel quality, ignition, or air. An intermittent power drop can be a sensor disagreement, a fuel delivery moment, a voltage dip, or a protective response to something that is not obvious. If the engine does not throw a clean, repeatable fault, the owner is left with, "It feels off," which is not the kind of evidence that produces quick answers. Now, to stay grounded, not every inconsistency means the engine is doomed. Boats live in messy conditions. Fuel is not always perfect. Batteries can be borderline. Loads change. Weather changes. So you cannot label every weird moment as a ticking disaster. But patterns matter. The perfect engine becomes a problem when the patterns become consistent enough to change your trust, yet inconsistent enough to resist diagnosis. You may notice it only after months. The engine seems to prefer certain conditions. It acts up after long runs. It behaves differently when a certain tank is used. It becomes picky in a way you did not experience early on. Owners also begin noticing aging in places they did not expect. Corrosion patterns that show up faster than they feel they should. Fasteners that look tired. A small leak that appears and then disappears. Again, none of this is automatic doom, but it is evidence that the engine is living in a world that is less controlled than the one it was designed in. And this is where repair decisions become heavy. A normal service item is comforting. A water pump service is a known cost. But if a problem hints at deeper cooling passage issues, sensor disagreement, or a component that must be replaced as an assembly, the owner begins hearing dollar signs. Not because the engine has failed, but because the path to certainty is expensive. This is the pre-failure phase in its purest form. The engine is still strong, but it is quietly becoming less forgiving. The margin shrinks. The owner notices, even if they cannot prove it to anyone else. A minor irregularity can be manageable on small power. Scale it up, the same symptom carries heavier risk, higher bills, bigger consequences for distance, weather, control, big outboards, big drama, big money, big consequences. The emotional weight of a high horsepower engine is not just performance. It is the kind of confidence it gives you when you leave the dock. When you can climb on plane quickly, outrun weather, and carry heavy loads without strain, you feel safe. That safety becomes part of the purchase justification. It becomes part of the pride. So when a big outboard becomes a problem, it hits differently. A small motor acting strange is annoying. A large motor acting strange changes how you think about risk. The stakes are naturally higher because the boat is usually heavier. The trips are often longer, and the costs of repair are rarely gentle. The manufacturer promised durability, strength, and long-term value. The problem is that the modern big engine often contains more systems that can create expensive surprises. Digital steering, digital throttle and shift, complex charging strategies, high output alternators, advanced fuel injection, multiple sensors managing protective logic. These are incredible features when everything is happy, but they also create more potential points where one component can disrupt the whole system. This is where owners discover a painful mismatch between symptom and bill. A warning that sounds small can lead to a repair that feels huge. Not always because the manufacturer is trying to punish you, but because the component is bundled, calibrated, or tied to other systems. Labor also grows. Larger engines are heavier to move, harder to access, and more complex to rig. Even a straightforward job can take more hours simply because the engine and boat are physically more demanding. Hours become money quickly, especially when a shop needs to test, replicate, and verify a problem that happens only under certain conditions. Now add the human factor that nobody likes to discuss openly: priorities. If a dealer is overwhelmed, they may focus on engines that are fully down, because those owners are stranded. If your engine is running but acting weird, you may end up in a slower lane. That is not personal, it is triage. But it still affects the owner experience. So the big engine owner adapts. They run closer to shore. They choose safer routes. They avoid pushing the boat hard. They start carrying backup gear and telling themselves it is just being smart. But the truth is, they are responding to uncertainty. And uncertainty is expensive, even without a receipt. It changes how often you go out. It changes where you go. It changes how much you enjoy the boat. That is the hidden cost of the pre-failure years. The engine still performs, but it steals confidence one decision at a time. This is also where the comment sections catch fire, because owners disagree about what it means. Some will say the engine is still fine, and the owner is overthinking. Others will say they have seen the same symptom, and it was the beginning of a costly chain. Both can be true in different cases, and that uncertainty is exactly why perfect engines become problems early. You cannot always know which path you are on until you are already deep into it. Big power earns admiration, plus it can demand constant attention. But let's flip the lens toward modest engines that stay practical, predictable, easy to keep, the small underdog that quietly wins in real life. Power gets respect because it announces itself. Simplicity rarely does. It looks plain, almost forgettable. In a service bay, that plainness is a compliment because it usually means fewer surprises, fewer special rules, and fewer repairs that turn into permission problems. That is why small outboards, especially in the 3 horsepower to 20 horsepower range, can become the most unexpected dealer favorite story on the water. They are not glamorous. They do not spark arguments at the dock. They do not win spec sheet contests. Still, people who see engines every day often trust them for a reason that has nothing to do with speed. They stay ownable. The promise of a lot of small motors is not luxury. It is function. They start, they run, they push, they bring you back. That practical honesty is why some dealers recommend them as the engine you do not have to build your life around, especially when they are built on proven, uncomplicated designs. Staying grounded matters here. Small. Engines are not magic. Old fuel can ruin your day fast. Carburetors can clog. Corrosion can do real damage if the motor is stored badly. Neglect can turn a simple motor into a stubborn one. Small does not mean indestructible. The difference shows up after something goes wrong. With simpler designs, the repair path is often clearer. Fuel issues behave like fuel issues. Ignition problems tend to announce themselves more directly. Cooling troubles are usually easier to trace. The engine is less likely to hide behind layers of protective logic, and more likely to give you a symptom you can actually interpret. Parts continuity can also be kinder. Certain small engine families share components across more years, which helps long-term ownership. The motor may not be high technology, but it can be highly survivable. That is a different kind of reliability than brochure reliability. This underdog chapter matters because it redefines perfect. Perfect is not only smoothness and silence. Perfect is also stability across years of changing dealer focus, shifting suppliers, and changing market attention. Many owners discover that the hard way. They run a premium big engine that becomes complicated, then add a small auxiliary motor that just starts every time. Over time, that little engine becomes the one they trust emotionally, even if it cannot do the big job. Ownership, stability is not just comfort, it becomes money. Buyers price uncertainty fast. Trade offers soften, and planning starts beating luck long before any failure. Resale shock, and the checklist that separates luck from planning. Most people imagine failure as a dramatic moment: smoke, alarms, and a clear choice: repair or repower. The reality is quieter. The pressure often begins when the market shifts, long before the engine stops. An outboard can run beautifully while the resale conversation changes around it. Buyers get cautious. Dealers get picky. Trade-in numbers soften. Online stories multiply until a few bad experiences feel like a pattern. Sometimes that market reaction is fair, responding to real parts costs or known weak points. Sometimes it is emotional, driven by reputation more than data. Either way, the owner feels it. This is how a perfect engine becomes a problem without turning a wrench. You thought you could sell easily if needed. You expected value to hold. Then you realize the used market is judging more than performance today. It is judging risk over the next several years. Now add the quiet pre-failure uncertainty, a quirk that is not catastrophic, not consistent, not easy to prove. It might be minor. It might never grow. Still, it exists, and it forces a decision. Do you pay now to chase certainty? Do you sell while everything still run strong? Do you keep it and accept the mental tax of doubt? Do you repower and buy peace? This is where honesty matters. Sometimes an engine truly is fine and will run for years. Sometimes the issue was a battery, a fuel event, or a sensor that gets replaced and never returns. Sometimes the market panic is louder than the reality. Other times, a small symptom is the first pebble that leads to bigger costs later. So the smarter move is a checklist built on what you can actually evaluate. Start with dependency. If one electronic module can lock the engine into a protective state that requires dealer-level access to resolve, that risk grows with age. Next, look at support, your real support, not the brand's reputation. How strong is your dealer network? How long are wait times in peak season? Are technicians comfortable with your engine generation, or is it treated like yesterday's platform? Then look at parts commonality. Engines that share key components across many years often age better from an ownership perspective than one-off variations, even if those variations were excellent performers. Finally, track patterns instead of isolated moments. One strange event is not a verdict. Repeated behavior in similar conditions is evidence. Document conditions, fuel source, load, temperature, and what the engine did. That turns "it feels weird" into something a professional can chase. The real takeaway is simple. Engines almost never betray you in one dramatic moment. They wear your confidence down quietly, season after season, long before they ever quit. And that uncertainty can cost more time than a failure ever would. If you've dealt with this or have questions about your own setup, drop them in the comments. And if this helped, like the video and subscribe for honest, experience-based insights that save you time, money, and frustration.